Good afternoon, everyone. I hope we don't have any post-lunchtime sleepiness here because we have a really exciting discussion. I'm Sewell Chan, editor-in-chief of the Texas Tribune. So grateful to be here with all of you, and I'm really honored right now to introduce our panel of distinguished leaders of really important cities. Let me start with, from your right, Mayor Ginger Nelson has served as mayor of Amarillo since May of 2017. She grew up in the small town of Spearman and graduated from Texas Tech with degrees in Spanish, advertising, and law. Mayor Nelson moved to Amarillo with her husband, Kevin, and they started their law firm in 2003. In 2011, they purchased the Amarillo building, Amarillo's original high-rise, and started their real estate development business. Welcome, Mayor Nelson. In the middle, we have Mayor Mark Hicks. He is a fifth-generation Lufkinite and also a commercial real estate developer focusing on reviving historic buildings in the city's downtown. Mayor Hicks was elected mayor of Lufkin in May of 2021. He is a graduate of Lufkin High School and received his BA from Stephen F. Austin State University. He and his wife, Callie, are the parents of 3 daughters. Welcome, Mayor Hicks. Last but certainly not least, next to me is Councilman Steve Massengale, who was elected to the Lubbock City Council representing District 4 in May of 2016. Councilman Massengale grew up in Lubbock, where he attended Monterey High School and later graduated from Texas Tech with a degree in business. He and his wife, Stephanie, a Lubbock native, own Advanced Graphics, a company that manufactures and distributes promotional products, and The Matador, a local business that specializes in selling Texas Tech apparel and gifts. Mr. Massengale, I hope you'll give me a discount on a Texas Tech sweatshirt.
We can arrange that in our preparation for a win in Ames, Iowa. Where's Lawrence?
Very well, very well. So what I'd like to structure it this way. I'm gonna ask each of you in sequence a few questions about your community. And then I'm gonna open it up and ask some questions that really, have a more free-form discussion with all of you. And then of course, we'll be saving the last 10 minutes for Q&A. Does that sound okay? Let me start, Councilman, with Lubbock, since we're here in Lubbock. Earlier this month, voters in this city, which I learned from you is approaching close to 300,000 people, which is a really interesting thing when you think about what we mean with rural, right? 300,000 is not, we're a city in rural Texas, but it's a substantial city. Voters approved a $200 million bond issue, and this was 1 year after they rejected a very similar bond measure. What changed between the two elections?
It's a great question. First off, we're thankful that the voters have supported our most recent bond election. So the difference in the street bond. So I guess first I would say it's been since '09 since Lubbock has had a street bond. And no discredit to anyone who's come before our council, but a growing city and all growing cities in Texas, as y'all well know, you've got to keep up with infrastructure. And so we're behind. The major polarizing item that was not on this last bond package was Broadway. It was a very high-ticket item for those of you that don't know Lubbock, Broadway connects Texas Tech to I-27. It's in some places over 100 years old, and it's partly pavement and partly brick, but it was a $40 million price tag on that, and that was controversial. I believe that the way we changed our strategy in educating and talking about what the council wished for on the bond package had a significant difference. And the other thing is the timing of the election. A year ago was a single item issue on the ballot, and obviously we're in the middle of midterm, so voter turnout was quite a bit more this time.
Councilman, talk to us about the politics of growth. While rural Texas as a whole might have a stable or slightly shrinking population, the situation for cities in rural Texas is very different. As I understand it, Lubbock's kind of growing by leaps and bounds. How are you managing the housing, transportation, and other pressures that come with that growth?
So it feels, if you live here in Lubbock, it feels like we're experiencing significant growth. I think it's the fact that we've gotten to the size we are is that we still have that good, healthy incremental growth that is, 2 to 3% a year. It's just so much more. We have experienced significant growth in our housing starts, for example. If you put Abilene and Amarillo together and you could multiply those numbers times 2, Lubbock still has more housing starts. And so, Lubbock's fortunate. We have a lot of land. We have great traffic infrastructure. And so we find that piece of it is attractive and easy to manage. As a city council, I think we stay up at night thinking about infrastructure.
And finally, Councilman, I asked someone in Lubbock recently, how are town-gown relations here? And she said, what do you mean? The kind of friction that sometimes, in other states and on the East Coast that you see between universities and cities doesn't seem to be as much the case here. How would you describe the city's relationship with the university?
As goes Lubbock, goes Texas Tech, and vice versa. We benefit from a very productive relationship with Texas Tech. I believe Lawrence would agree with that. We recognize that if we're going to grow our community in a healthy way and grow our university at the same time, that we must lock arms. And so we work together on many projects. There's things that the university does that they keep the city apprised of, and the city makes sure the university knows where we're headed as well.
Thank you, Councilman. Mayor Nelson up next. Mayor, as I understand it, voters in the city of Amarillo have voted down proposals to kind of rehabilitate the civic center of your city and also to repair, school infrastructure, even though, as I learned when I met you a few months ago, some school buildings are really, not even, safe to occupy anymore. Why do you think the voters made this decision?
I think we're in a really challenging time, and it's not just local politics, it's certainly not just rural politics, but it's our nation as a whole is really in a season of struggling to trust government. And the more those narratives are pushed, the more they're pushed nationally, the more we feel that locally. And so the challenge, at least in Amarillo, has been really getting the information out there. While we could say, our school district could say, hey, we have a middle school that is so old and it's foundationally not going to be safe to occupy in the next few years. If we don't repair it, we're going to have to close that school down. But you would not believe how much disinformation came out in that election, and it came out just against a tax increase. And so all things that involve voting with your wallet are tied to this national distrust discourse that we have, distrust of government. And so until we can solve that, and you solve it by just having more conversations, you solve it by increasing transparency, you solve it by slowing down, allowing more time for questions to be asked, and trying to build relationship between government and citizens. And it doesn't happen overnight. So, we're working on those issues in Amarillo, and until we do, we will not be able to get to these big projects. And the longer we delay those big projects, the more they're going to cost taxpayers in the end. So that's an unfortunate reality.
Well, it's really interesting. Mis and disinformation are huge topics for us at the Texas Tribune. Obviously, we try to provide, free, nonpartisan, fact-based news. We don't have an opinion section. Is the disinformation occurring? Is it Facebook groups? Is it apps? Local news, of course, there's less of it than there used to be. Is that a contributing factor?
Yeah, it's not so much the media because as you know, newspaper, TV, and radio are all struggling to shift as more and more people get their news from multiple different sources, social media included. So really the disinformation that we've seen in Amarillo does come from social media, but it also comes from just a couple of pockets of people very wealthy people in the city who are opposed to a tax increase, who have bought billboards, done mailers, kind of operated outside the PAC system. Recently at City Hall, we had somebody say, well, I'd like to know the PAC that was working against the Civic Center vote back in November of 2020. We had a citizen come in and request that. And we said, well, we don't have anyone of record who formed a PAC to work against that. And so, they're working outside of our PAC reporting requirements. And because you don't know who they are, you can't really do anything about that. So it really is a small group of citizens who are vehemently opposed to any tax increase.
Tell me a little bit about Amarillo's experience of COVID-19. You had a lot of people, patients from throughout the Panhandle coming into the city for care. Obviously, the pandemic's not over yet. How did you manage those challenges?
Well, for one thing, I tell people anytime you travel outside of Amarillo that the superpower of West Texas, and Lubbock gets this too, you understand it as a regional city for your region. Our superpower is that we think regionally. Whereas maybe Dallas and Fort Worth, kind of tend to fall into a little co-opetition or a little competition sometimes. We don't really feel that way in West Texas. We're partners and we think as a region. And so when we began formulating how to respond to COVID-19, we knew that was going to involve not just the people inside the city limits of Amarillo, but definitely the people in the top 26 Texas counties, but also people from a 5-state region, because Amarillo is the medical hub for eastern New Mexico, for southeastern Colorado, for northern Oklahoma, and for southwestern Kansas. They all come to Amarillo for medical treatment. And so they're our neighbors too. And when we were giving out vaccines that we were attributed from Austin, we gave them to everybody. If you came to Amarillo for medical care, you got a vaccine, whether you were a Texas resident or not. And that's part of just thinking regionally. And that's part of living in rural parts of our nation, is that we don't necessarily stop being neighbors at county lines. And we don't stop being neighbors at state lines. We are neighbors with people, even though they may live in New Mexico, Colorado, Oklahoma, or Kansas. So really how we responded to the COVID-19 pandemic was recognizing that we had to have partnership with all of those small rural hospitals in all of those counties and states. And it affected them because we could not take their critical care patients. And many people stayed in those rural hospitals getting they had critical care patients who were not getting critical care because they just didn't have those facilities and they didn't have the equipment that they needed to take care of them. But that was part of how we responded as a region.
Yeah. And then finally, tell us a little bit about the new veterinary school in Amarillo. I know that's a big topic, but tell us about how you got there.
Sure. Well, I guess Chancellor Duncan and President Skuvenek, if I could, I would high five you from right here, just because what a fantastic experience that was, and what a win for rural Texas. What a win for every student who has the dream of going to veterinary school. And they now have two options to do that in the state of Texas and pay in-state tuition and not have to graduate with a veterinary degree, but tons of out-of-state debt from going to an out-of-state school. So we're thrilled, first and foremost, for the students. We're thrilled, secondly, for the industry, because we have such a need with so many veterinarians retiring and rolling out of their careers. We need to replace them, and we need to replace them with kids who want to go back to living on rural farms in the state of Texas. And so the Texas Tech School of Veterinary Medicine will accomplish that. Over 600 applicants for this year's, I think, 80 spots. Lawrence, is that right? So, I mean, definitely a demand for it. From the city's point of view, of course, the city of Amarillo made a significant financial investment, and we're thrilled already with the return. We are already receiving more economic return on that investment than we had projected. So it's a $76 million return to us every year in our local economy, and we made about a $60 million investment. So I think that's a pretty good deal for us. We're really excited about it.
Now, being a journalist, I've got to ask, how did you all overcome the political opposition from A&M?
There was political opposition? I don't think so. I actually believe there might have been a little bit of in-school rivalry, and we all accept that. But A&M is for those vet students. They want to see students have opportunity, and they want to see the state of Texas increase in its influence in the industry, especially the ag industry. And so there might have been just a little bit of tug as we worked through those issues, but all in all, I would think they're pleased now. As a matter of fact, I think we're still seeing some growth and investment from what I call the mothership, the A&M system, into our local West Texas A&M campus there in Canyon, Texas. And we've been pleased with that. So I think it's been a win-win for both schools, and it's certainly a win for our local economies, for our ag industry, and for every student who's involved in those programs.
Very diplomatic, Mayor. And now I'd like to ask Mayor Hicks of Lufkin a few questions. You know, Mayor, one of the things you're really known for, both in your work in your regular employment and also your leadership as mayor, has been downtown. Why downtown? Why is that kind of important to you? And how has kind of your focus on urbanism been received in the community?
So, Sewell, first I just want to say I appreciate you having me here today, and I appreciate the Texas Tribune putting this on. It's great to see so many people come together and talk about advancing rural communities and things we can do to grow them and keep them alive. To your question, I got my start about 15 years ago rehabbing downtown buildings. I had a business, and I was looking for a place to locate my business to, and I found a vacant building downtown, just as you see in many small towns throughout the state and probably throughout the country. A lot of the downtown areas, businesses have moved out, gone to the mall or the new interstate that runs through town, and they're blighted. There's just not much going on. So I bought a building, I fixed it up, and I realized I have a passion for rehabbing old buildings. It's become a love of mine. My wife gives me a hard time because sometimes maybe I focus more on that than her and my 3 kids, but I try to find the balance there. But in time, over the next 15 years, I bought 40 buildings in downtown Lufkin, rehabbed them. We have everything from loft apartments, retail, office space, and beyond. And I think we showed people that a lot of people don't have the vision to see what could be done with something. And if you can show them, they'll get on board with it. But for me, the biggest reason to improve our downtown area in Lufkin was because it's the heart of our community. So when we bring businesses in, so we're all about good paying jobs in Lufkin, and we're trying to bring in as much industry as we can. And we would realize when companies would come to Lufkin, they'd want to go downtown. Hey, show me your city. We've got a great zoo in Lufkin. We'd show them the zoo. We'd show them downtown. And if they saw a downtown that was vibrant, things were happening, they're excited to come there. But we're also realizing that when we're trying to bring businesses or industry to Lufkin, it's not so much about what kind of tax breaks or how much money you're going to give me. It's about, are my employees going to want to relocate here? Are they going to be happy here? And we're finding that a lot of young people really embrace this new urbanism in downtown areas, and it's been very positive for us in Lufkin.
Now, some in Lufkin, have said that the newer jobs, they're not bringing the newer companies and businesses coming into downtown especially aren't creating as many jobs as, say, reopening a foundry or a mill. How have you responded to those concerns?
So I would say we need a little bit of everything. The downtown businesses are retail. Most of those businesses started organically downtown. They didn't move from somewhere else in the community. But I'll also tell you, Lufkin has been very successful in the last few years in bringing in industry. We've got a company building a research and development facility from Lyon, France right now, which is very exciting. And we've realized what our niche is, and that's moving, people that want to be in a big city. We're close to Houston, but they want to get out of the hurricane zone, so they move up to Lufkin. We've got an interstate connecting our city to to Houston as well that's under construction right now. But to answer your question, I would say we need a little bit of everything, because when those people aren't working at those industries, then they're going to need something to do, and that's, enjoy downtown.
And finally, I want to ask you about, well, East Texas is different from West Texas in some important ways. Obviously, given the different historical trajectory, East Texas has tons of counties, and they're all, some of them are very small, but have a lot of people. Relative, compared with West Texas counties, which of course are the size of some states. Tell us a little bit about this question of regionalism. For example, Lufkin, Nacogdoches, and Jacksonville might be competing for an economic development project instead of working together to try and attract it. How do you manage that problem, and what role does the Deep East Texas Council of Governments play?
So I think that, when you think about regionalism historically in Angevin County, Lufkin being the county seat, DECCOG's been the leader in our region for regionalism. We're now seeing more and more communities getting on board, because they're realizing that if we don't band together, and just like Mayor Nelson said, you guys have always worked together, and that's great, and we're learning that that's the way of the future. So we've got to come together if we're going to have a voice in Austin or on the federal level. And we're working well with many of these cities, and we're just bringing people in, and we're saying, sometimes, like, our community's 35,000, a population of 35,000, our county's 90,000. We have some communities that have 1,000 people or 2,000 people, and I'm sure that goes on in many places. But you bring those people in and say, hey, we really want to hear your opinion on how we can work together. You work with them, you find compromise, and you show them that you really care, so that people that live, because a big problem you have people in these smaller communities, probably like outside of Lubbock, I drove through some today, where you want to continue to have citizens there, but that job is going to be in Lubbock, or it's going to be in Amarillo. So you want to provide that for them, and they realize that. And if they don't embrace that, that community won't exist, because everybody will just move to the larger cities. And that's what you're seeing, happen in a lot of places now.
So Lufkin enjoys status as a kind of foreign trade zone.
Correct.
What role has that played in attracting jobs?
So that's been huge. Two other companies are relocating to Lufkin for that very reason, and it's been very advantageous for us. Our economic development director, Bob Sanford, has also started an organization of foreign trade zones throughout the state. But I would encourage you, if you don't know a lot about the foreign trade zones, look into that, because it can be very beneficial for manufacturing jobs in your community.
Yeah, fantastic. So now I want to just open it up and ask a few questions, really, of each of you, so we can have a dialogue. Tell us about the pressures of urbanization in rural areas. Are you starting to see kind of city-rural tensions within rural Texas?
I'll start with that one. Lubbock works so well with all of our surrounding communities, and at the same time, we know they're struggling. We know that rural healthcare is an issue, and of course, we see that as a reason that they're attracted to Lubbock. But it's important to recognize the struggles they have, and at the same time, do what we can to provide the resources they need. And so, like Mayor Hicks said, the jobs that are available here in Lubbock, so they can work and possibly continue to live in their community.
Can you explain that just a little more in depth?
Yeah, I've heard in particular that as some small towns are really struggling and losing population, that especially young people, they may not move as far as Dallas, but they may very well be leaving the farm or leaving their smaller communities for a Lufkin, for an Amarillo. And with that, is there a sense that the cities in rural areas are actually kind of, exacerbating what Secretary Vilsack talked about this morning, like extracting kind of human and financial capital from the larger region?
I don't think that's happening any more than it has happened over the last 40 or 50 years. I say in Amarillo that we are the nation's largest small town, and that's because everyone there is really one or two generations away from that small town. They all have a connection to grandparents or aunts and uncles who are still in one of those small towns in the top 26 counties. And so it really is part of the culture of Amarillo. And it's part of the culture of those small towns as well, that we can offer things. Amarillo has things. My parents come a couple of times a week, both for doctor's visits, to shop at places and eat out, for entertainment. As you were saying, our downtown district is revitalized and offers a lot of entertainment to small town folks. So it's, I think, a very symbiotic relationship, and I don't feel like it is taking away from small towns. And I say that, my husband and I are both Spearman High School graduates. My assistant, Carter Estes, is a White Deer graduate, and so we are products of being able to stay in the region because of the job opportunities that Amarillo offers us. And then Amarillo is a big brother to all of those 62 cities in the Texas Panhandle. And I would even say Amarillo has led out in a regional broadband project. We recently just applied for a $100 million grant. And that will cover the region with broadband and connectivity opportunities that they would not have had but for Amarillo's leadership. So where there might be detriments, I would also say there are advantages.
So I'll pivot way off, and then I'm going to come back to your question. So I drive my 15-year-old to school every day, and in the car, she has her phone and she's taking pictures, different angles. So I'm like, what are you doing? Well, Dad, this is how we communicate now. I got to have Snapchat. I can't use Facebook or text. We stay in communication all day through photographs. Okay, that's beyond me. I don't understand. But my point is, how are you going to create something for her to want to stay in your town when she grows up? And where is she going to end up? So my point is, it's all about the people. I mean, truly, if you want your community to grow, you've got to bring people in if you're losing people, or you got to keep them happy in that community. You got to work with them. And obviously broadband is huge because everybody's on their internet everywhere, and they want to be on their phone, and they want to be connected. But I feel like Lufkin's been very successful in just working with people. Just like, hey, we don't have all the answers, and we want you to come in and let's apply common sense. I tell people that unreasonable people is my kryptonite because you just can't deal with them. But if you get some reasonable people in and you say, hey, this is what we're facing, and these are the challenges we have, you'd be surprised at how people will come together and solve many of the problems. But to your point about funding, or do some of the smaller communities feel like the larger communities, I guess, get more funding or benefit more? I think in our area, that's not the case. I don't think we face that.
For each of you, what is the most common or frequent complaint that you hear from constituents? And what is your proudest achievement?
I think the complaint that we hear the most, it's taxes, which is so ironic because Amarillo sits as one of the lowest tax rates across the state. Both in actuality, we're at 40 cents, but as a per person, like a pro rata tax rate, our city is very low. So again, it's sort of tied to the national dialogue, I think. And not so much with folks being educated as to what they actually get for the taxes that they do pay. And I also think that people are dissatisfied, just again, back to trusting government. So just wanting more and more and more transparency, but they want it on quick reaction. Like they want it in a headline. They want to be able to read it in 15 words or less and have the same understanding that you as an elected official who's maybe studied on the issue or worked on the issue for years, they want to have equal footing with you, but yet at the same time, the reality of their lives don't allow for them to be as invested and be as in-depth studied on the issue. And I don't know how we solve that. But that's something that I hear as far as a complaint. What was the second half of that question?
Your proudest accomplishment.
Oh, wow. Proudest accomplishment. Definitely Texas Tech Vet School is up there for me. I'm looking at the vet school team over here. The broadband issue, if we cover the entire Texas Panhandle with this broadband rollout, I will be extremely proud with what that means for people who haven't had that access. And I couldn't agree with you any more, Mr. Jackson, about the fact that it is about jobs. We have a unique season of growth and opportunity in Amarillo right now. In the past 6 months, we've broken our economic development record twice. with brand-new projects that have far exceeded the value, both in number of jobs and capital investment. So we just have a tremendous amount of economic development in Amarillo right now. And I think as a region, we should be focusing on taking advantage of that. The more jobs we can bring to rural parts of Texas where we have very low commutes and we have very strong schools and we have the ability to grow our schools and we have land that we can sell and develop, I think that ought to be good for everyone in the state of Texas, because every dollar that we bring into this state is one that everyone, every citizen in the state of Texas benefits from.
Mayor Hicks?
So I'll say this for all of us because we probably deal with this, and that's taxes. And I had a guy one time tell me, we were talking about lowering our tax rate like 0.000532, but we could say we lowered it, right? And people like that. And he said, well, when you're at Walmart, just ask somebody, you know what the tax rate is in Lufkin? No, but it's too high, you know? And they're always gonna think that. So you're right, we're never gonna overcome that. I would say, and just to put it bluntly, in Lufkin, we've had a few funerals, and now we can move things forward. You know, it's a new day, and we're making some things happen. And I get what you're saying with your community, and you can, and we've had them in Lufkin where somebody comes along and they create big issues for you. But I always try to take them to lunch and say, hey, what's the deal? We're on the same page here. It's our community. I know you want good things. Let's find a happy medium. But anyway, I just wanted to touch on that for a minute. The biggest complaint I get is people in Lufkin want to see us save as many animals as we can in our animal shelter. And that's been interesting to me. I mean, there's a ton of dog lovers in the world. My kids love dogs. We used to have 3 female dogs, a lot of females in the household. Anyway, we are doing a study right now at our animal shelter on how we could do that, because it's what our community wants. And I tell people, I govern based on what a majority of this community wants to see happen. And if I get to a point where it doesn't align, and sometimes I'm not always in favor of doing that, but I get on board to do it. And if I get to a point where I can't do it for some reason, then I'll step down and let somebody else run as mayor. But as far as accomplishments, Lufkin, again, has made some great things happen in economic development. We had a very unique project in our downtown area about a year ago called Lufkin Forward. Had a huge response from our community, these surveys, and it's exciting just to bring so many different people in. We didn't have anybody show up at the meeting against the project, which that's awesome. We had huge buy-in from the community. So that is kicking off right now, and we're excited about that. But I would say that along with job creation.
Quick follow-up, Mayor, notwithstanding your bereavement about the loss of some folks in the community, tell us in all seriousness, tell us what the impact of kind of generational change is having on city politics.
So I don't know if I'm the youngest mayor Lufkin's ever had. I'm 43 years old, but I'm probably one of the youngest. So it's a new day in Lufkin, and people are excited because we're making things happen. We're bringing in, like, a few years ago, we did this Christmas festival when we brought in this ice skating rink. It was like that chalkboard business. Well, this year is like the legit ice skating rink. I mean, the one in the Galleria down in Houston type deal. And people are excited, and they're like, hey, we deserve this. I mean, we're going to make things happen in Lufkin. And I think people, once they see, if you get on board with something, we're not about talking Lufkin. We're about action, making things happen. So I'm excited about that.
And finally, Councilman.
Well, I guess, first of all, I think it's always great to be with other city leaders, because we always think we have our own problems, but we all have the same problems. And I'll take their answers and tie them together. I think what's tough is I think people get siloed, and in this world where they want sound bites and they want headlines, if you're talking tax, the tax rate can't be low enough. But if their alley's not graded, it can't get graded fast enough. Or if the dogs are loose, you can't get those dogs picked up fast enough. And so, you have to work through it as a local leader. You have to work through that dynamic of balancing tax rate and explaining why sometimes you may require an incremental increase so that we can provide services, or the services that you expect us to provide, those core services, and what the resulting tax rate would be. So, when you're talking budget, I mean, drive that tax rate down, but when it comes to services, they don't tie that tax rate necessarily to services. And I think that's probably the dynamic that makes the job toughest. Greatest accomplishment, that's tough. I would say, whenever I walk away from this job is the fact that I made Lubbock still a great place to raise a family and to start a business or to have a great job. And if the things we did together help that, then that's what I'm most proud of. I think about what we've done in downtown Lubbock. All of our downtowns are different, but we took a blighted building in downtown Lubbock and made it City Hall, and that was a tough project. And we found a way, and I saw Dr. Satterwhite here earlier. I don't know if he's still here, but we found a way for South Plains College to have a presence in downtown Lubbock. It's important to have people in downtown. The downtown development is chicken and the egg. I mean, you have to have residents downtown if you want retail or restaurants to come in, but people don't want to live downtown until there's retail and restaurants. So, I think about how we managed COVID, how we protected our businesses the best way we could, how we've changed our policing model from centralized to decentralized. There's just a lot of factors, and at the end of the day, I think all of that comes back. You wrap it all up and say, I think I work to make Lubbock a better place to live and to work.
Thank you. When the legislature convenes in January, what do you think your city and cities across rural Texas need the legislature to do and not do? Why don't we start with the councilman?
I'll take that one. You can't ask that question without talking about, you'll ask me about local control next is probably what you'll do. And I think those of us that lead up here locally, we watch that closely. If we were to view things from the perspective of our state delegations and understand what they're doing in Austin, I understand why some things happen the way they do, but when your responsibility is your constituency inside the city limits, local control is important. And that's why, to specifically answer your question, I hope we don't see any more property tax reform. I hope we don't see any more adjustment of revenue caps or anything to do with rollback. We all talked about regionalism, and I think the things that our eyes are on in Lubbock are things like the continued support and expansion of I-27. The Ports to Plains effort has been ongoing for many years, and we've made substantial accomplishments this year, not only in DC and Austin, and that isn't done without all the communities along that corridor working together along with our state delegations and our leadership in Washington to make sure that happens. Lubbock's going to look for support for their Veterans Cemetery. We're making our move into retail competition with our electric utility. We're going to look to the ledge for those types of things.
Mayor Hicks, Austin.
So in Lufkin, we're fortunate. We got two of the best representatives, I should say representative and senator in the state, and that's Robert Nichols and Trent Ashby, and they've done a fine job representing our region. In fact, I see Lonnie Hunt out there. Lonnie, didn't Trent sponsor the broadband bill in the state? Yeah. Senator Nichols too. So they, as far as I'm concerned, they're doing a good job. They live in our area. They know what needs to be done. They've helped us with a lot of highway funding in recent years, which was needed, and they got the job done. So I think they're doing a good job. I really don't have any complaints.
Of course, local control is something that we have a lot of conversations with. I'm very thankful for our delegation. I'm thankful for the way that the West Texas delegation works together, because we do need to all be saying the same thing in order for our voice to be heard in Austin. And I appreciate even how Senator Perry, how Representative Burrows, who represent the Lubbock area, take phone calls from me and work on issues that impact Amarillo as well as my senator and our representatives in the northern part of the Panhandle do. I do think as far as property taxes is concerned, I'm not hearing that we're going to hear any change in the cap. It's a 3.5% cap. I will just say to the room, Amarillo's inflation in our budget last year was 9%. And we're capped at 3.5. So it will take us 3 years just to catch up on what we've lost in 1 year. So again, a cookie cutter approach across the whole state of Texas is not local control. And I understand that you have to respond to taxpayers. They're talking to me all the time about taxes. I know they're talking to state legislators about taxes. And so that felt like a good fix, but it really just continues to bind cities in the problems that they have. You've heard us talk about infrastructure. One of the reasons why most cities are behind in infrastructure, I know Amarillo is, Councilman said that Lubbock is. We're behind because the price tags that go along with those infrastructure projects are big. There's a lot of zeros to them. And it's very difficult to get taxpayers, again, to vote against their wallet to support those infrastructure projects. So when you put restrictions on cities being able to move and do infrastructure projects, you put restrictions on cities being able to move their budgets to keep up with inflation, cities are just going to get further and further behind. And I think that is a major issue that I want Austin to hear from us. It's not new. They've heard it from us. But I agree that will continue to be a struggle as we go forward. It's also a struggle if you're a city far away from Austin. Other than your legislative voices, it's difficult to get your voice into the Capitol. Amarillo is closer to 3 state capitals than we are Austin. And so for me to get to Austin to have a conversation about an Amarillo issue or a conservative values issue, it costs me 2 days. 2 days away from City Hall. Also, I get paid $220 a year to be the mayor. So I have another job. It costs me 2 days away from my office, 2 days out of my city to go down to Austin to have those conversations. Mayor Adler is a friend. I like him. Steve can just walk a couple of blocks and have a conversation at the Capitol anytime he wants. And so I say, Steve and I know that we are definitely across the aisle from each other on issues. I represent a conservative community and often come from a conservative point of view. Steve represents the other point of view most of the time. And so his voice is at the Capitol more than my voice is. And when I hear legislators talk about not using city dollars or taxpayer dollars to hire a lobbyist to be present for me, communicating what my conservative community wants communicated in the Capitol, I feel like that is a detriment to conservative values. And so I understand taxpayers do not want taxpayer dollars spent anywhere that they don't have to be spent. But if you're going to tie my hands and not allow me to hire a lobbyist to be a voice for the citizens of Amarillo and Austin, I don't know how my voice is going to be near as loud or get near as much volume as someone like Mayor Adler's. So that's another issue that I'm talking with legislators about, because I recognize as conservatives that has an issue, that has a good tone to it when you put the headline of no taxpayer funded lobbying. Well, what that actually does is greatly diminish the voice of citizens in Amarillo.
Now, I invite folks to approach either microphone to ask questions of these local leaders. While you're doing so, let me ask about affordability. Obviously, home prices and the rising cost of rent are not as severe in rural cities as they are in Texas's biggest cities, some of which are the nation's biggest cities. But nonetheless, there is a housing crunch. What are you all doing to kind of improve affordability?
I talked earlier about our housing starts, and you're right. The Texas miracle has put us in in a situation where housing remains affordable. And I can't speak, I know Lubbock and Amarillo are very similar, but housing is very affordable in Lubbock. And as there becomes a challenge on them and the market becomes compromised, I mean, I think the only thing we can do as a city is make sure that we're working with those that are building houses or trying to move houses to make sure they can do it easily, and we're not, we don't stop them up with red tape.
Yeah, and I think we have used our economic development dollars and some incentives, that some of the incentive tools that cities still have to encourage those low to moderate income housing projects. And we actually have done a really important one in Amarillo to revamp the St. Anthony's Hospital. It's been vacant for over 30 years. And we've just turned that into a housing project in downtown and used some of those economic incentive agreements to do that. But I think it's really important for us to be not reactive, but proactive in doing that. And so Amarillo continues to look for ways to incentivize both on the development and the builder's end. How can we incentivize those price point houses in places where we already have infrastructure, infill type projects? Because that's good for our citizens to fight the cost of sprawling our city. But also incentivizing first-time home buyers and different people that we want to attract to move to Amarillo. Because I've always said, if I can get you to buy a house in Amarillo, you're going to love it, and you're going to live and raise your family there in Amarillo. But how can I get you to buy a house in Amarillo, right? So I think we've got to be proactive in developing some attractions and some incentives to doing that.
So in Lufkin, we've incentivized builders that are developers to put in subdivisions, build homes, and that's been popular, obviously. 10 or 15 years ago, we had an issue where we had a lot of people building homes outside of Lufkin, mainly for varying school districts. The school district in Lufkin ISD, went to work and really worked hard to step up their game, and we see that shift changing now. But we continue to assist subdivision construction, create housing in Lufkin. We don't see the spikes in home prices, the increases like you would see in much larger cities, probably even outside of like you guys' cities. Y'all probably don't see that so much at all. But for the most part, we do those things.
Great. Question, sir.
Pre-pandemic, I was aware and impressed that mayors, about a half dozen in West Texas on the north-south axis, big and small towns, formed a working group to meet and discuss common issues, and I think at the time it was the Port de Plains project. I'm wondering now, are you still meeting on that particular topic, or have you expanded to other problems, some of which we've heard during these last 2 days?
Sure. Yes, the Ports to Plains Board is still meeting. They had a meeting last week, actually, and I would say they are meeting with more fervor than they ever have because of the success that we've had in the last year in having the path from Laredo north all the way through Dalhart designated as a future federal interstate. And so that was a big win, and actually off through the eastern corner of New Mexico as well. A big win on our federal side. So that project has made more progress in the last 2 years than it has in the last 20 years, I think. So that's gonna happen. Now then when we get into federal highway funding timeframes as far as development, actual dollars, all of that, it gets a little depressing because it'll be decades. But we have the designation, and that project is important for the economic growth of the western side of the state of Texas.
Mayor Nilsson's absolutely right. The effort is definitely energized after the federal designation. You have to remember, and this is Congressman Arrington will thank me for this, but we are the region of our country, not only our state, that provides the food, fiber, and fuel. And if you've ever driven, spending time on I-35, you know that the traffic pressure is intense. So this is way overdue and very much needed. What's important to know as we move forward on Ports to Plains is there's lots of shovel-ready projects. There's lots of things that we can do now and apply pressure to that as we build segments into interstate highway standards that we can go and get started on. And she's also right. At this point, we've got to continue to push for funding for the expansion of the interstate.
Yeah, and I would just thank John Osborne, who has led that effort in the last 5 years, and then also give a shout out to Brenda Gunter, Mayor of San Angelo, and also former Mayor Dan Pope, who just did a yeoman's work on this project in the last 5 years.
Next question.
My name is Paul Nara. I'm with Connect to Educate. It's a rural broadband advocacy group. Also, my question is more for Trey and Ginger, because I know Mark, he kind of has the broadband angle with Senator Ashby and Nichols and Ashby. But how would what do you think about having some kind of program for cities or some of the small municipalities that would promote broadband and like Salina, just like this past year, I think the governor recognized them as a gigabit city because they passed the ordinance for helping, provide permitting or easier permitting in their city. Program that's similar to something like that would, because one of the biggest problems that I hear from ISPs are permitting, especially in small municipalities. But a lot of times it's not that they're not wanting to have permits passed or anything like that. It's more that they're just understaffed or something like that. But does either one of the cities have anything like that, or would that be anything that would be a program that would promote broadband like that? To become
I think that would be well received, and probably if you hadn't met Lonnie Hunt, you ought to talk to him about it. You could probably weigh in on that and tell us more about what we have available. I know a big issue we face in Lufkin is just being able to get a hold of somebody that will talk to you at the internet company to set your internet up. I mean, I say that kind of tongue in cheek, but I mean, it's hard. These are big companies, right, and they don't sometimes have a local presence. So to your point, yes, I think that's a good idea. And I think that's probably needed in smaller type communities where they don't know where the access is or how to get the access or work together to create it.
I'll just add, I don't know if this specifically answers your question, but what we're doing in Lubbock, and I will just tell you that not far from where you sit right now, in Lubbock, there are people that are not served by broadband. And we also know, especially as we come through the pandemic, that broadband, and we talked about it in the prior session, I mean, it's a critical utility for families at this point. And so we've used ARPA funds that we received. The prior council and this council has discussed it, and we've met with our internet service providers to help work with them, let them do the work. The city does not want to be in another utility business, and help you use that money to build last mile as they build out that infrastructure. And that seems, we looked at lots of options, and I can't remember exactly what Mayor Nielsen is doing in Amarillo, but that seems to be a good solution at this point for Lubbock.
Yeah, we used a little bit of ARPA money, $2 million, a little bit more than that actually, but we made a deal with AT&T, and they brought in, so a public-private partnership, they brought in $20 million of infrastructure to our $2 million investment, so we thought that was a good deal for our taxpayers, and that will close the gap in our city. It'll take 3 years to install all of that infrastructure, but at the end of that, those portions, those Dalmatian spots in our city that currently don't have access will have access. And in our contract with AT&T, we specified that the price point had to be the same thing that the federal dollar stipend would pay. So, 70% of the kids in our school system are on free and reduced lunch, which means automatically their families would qualify for that federal subsidy for broadband connectivity. So I think every city is definitely working that issue post-pandemic, and I'm very pleased with the progress that Amarillo has made there.
I'm so sorry that we're out of time, but Mayor Nelson, Mayor Hicks, Councilman Massengale, thank you so much for this terrific discussion.